City Council was a big one last night. Central part of the discussion was a contentious issue regarding a meeting last August. And we'll dive into that. But remember, this isn't a summary of all that was decided, just a recap of the conversations that occurred at Council. With that being said, let's dive in. This summary will focus more on the Integrity Commissioner's report and the conversations around that. Why? Because it's important stuff, and it took up nearly half of City Council's time last night, about an hour and a half. It was a Commissioner's report in response to conduct by Councillor Morales. It was comments about Councillor Alwyn made during a City Council meeting last August. Last night, Council voted to accept the Commissioner's report, meaning that Morales must submit a written apology within 5 days. Here's a summary of the situation by Commissioner Suzanne Cragg. She's an independent professional integrity commissioner hired by the city to deal with these matters.
This report sets out the violation of section 5.3 and 20.6 of the Code of Conduct. The first states that members will not conduct their dealings with each other in a way that maintains public confidence in the office to which they have been elected. They are open and honest, focused on issues rather than personalities, avoiding aggressive, offensive, or abusive conduct. Section 20.6 states that members shall not make inappropriate comments or gestures to or about an individual, including colleagues, and shall not conduct themselves in a way that is known or ought to reasonably be known to be offensive. The complaint I received in August, and it alleged that the respondent violated section 5.3 of the Code of Conduct by focusing on personalities rather than issues. I set out verbatim the complaint allegations in the report before you. After receiving the complaint and conducting a preliminary review to determine if the matter was with respect to a code infraction, I gave notice of receipt of the complaint to the respondent. After an initial mediation session, the parties appear to have agreed to my recommended next steps. However, after requesting information from the respondent on several occasions without receiving a reply, I suspended the mediation process. There was a discussion of an informal process, but the respondent did not engage properly. Subsequently, the respondent did contact me on March 9th, 2021, to advise that there were circumstances that prevented him from responding to the several email requests from my office. While I acknowledge that this has been a challenging time for everyone, including the respondent's lack of response amounted to non-compliance with the code.
For your information, the respondent in this situation is Councillor Morales. The complainant is Councillor Alwyn. Basically, what Craig is saying is that Morales repeatedly did not engage with the commissioner during the mediation process. In the report, Craig suggests a reprimand and a written apology from Morales to Councillor Alwyn within 5 days of City Council's decision. And now let's zone in on Council's discussion on this matter. Here's the respondent, Councillor Morales. He spoke about his perspective on Alwyn's behavior, which he says fits into a pattern of pouting as opposed to teamwork on City Council. He did not define what either of those terms meant in regards to council behavior. And here's what he had to say about the situation.
You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Members of council, tonight you are voting whether or not councillors present and future can call out toxic behavior among colleagues who shame them for their votes, or whether they will live with concerns about being reprimanded for doing so. I respectfully, and I want to emphasize respectfully, disagree that the comments about lack of leadership and pouting were in breach of the code. And I will establish, very related to the report, a pattern of behavior by the complainant that substantiates the words that I used, which I not only can, but should be able to call it toxic behavior accountable by any colleague at any time when it becomes a pattern that impedes our ability to do our work, therefore making it part of our occupation. Morale on council has been allowed through actions and then inaction to die. I wish it never got to this point. There comes a point when the first time something happens, someone might get a pass. And the second time, maybe they get the benefit of the doubt. But whether it be the IC report on the Broussard Nuttall issue, the downtown Barrie BIA situation at the time, if the common element among many instances, whether it be about the complainant or any other member of council, the common element is that person, somebody has to then call a spade and hold that common person accountable. I did. Did I still apologize to the complainant in mediation regarding the comments about implied racism in writing, which was the request of me? And was I then frustrated that that apology wasn't good enough back in October, early November, because it didn't cover the comments about leadership and pouting, which AKA the opposite of pouting is teamwork? Yeah, I was upset. But was I finally floored when I was informed by the complainant that the complainant chose not to accept the eventual late apology last week about leadership and teamwork, and then chose to leave the report on today's agenda, even though the apology had already been fulfilled or was being asked in mediation and given to the IC? Yes, because even though I have made it abundantly clear that my comments were substantiated by a pattern of behavior and did not breach the code, uniting this divided city and focusing on what matters is more important to me as an individual. So that's why I still extended that apology. The IC has made it clear to the complainant that he could have still resolved this issue, even though he got my apology post-submission to the city clerk. That is a very important point to consider going forward. We as councillors cannot vilify fellow councillors when they do not vote the way we want them to. Beyond that, do you want to know what, members of council, do you know what was hurtful about the chaos that was unleashed? The implication that the only visible minority immigrant councillor, that's me, by the way, I know it's hard to tell sometimes, is racist or is supportive or passively allows systemic racism to occur under his watch in his institution. The complainant reads about discrimination happening in textbooks and in the world and on Twitter. And while I am very fortunate that I may not see as much discrimination as some other people, it's not textbooks for me. It's experiencing it in real life in my own skin. I applaud the complainant for wanting to use his privilege and wealthy upbringing to make the world a more equitable place. Trust me, I can tell you firsthand, not all of us had that security growing up, and that is to be commended. But I was not going to sit by when it was implied that myself and my councillor colleagues are either unknowingly or passively allowing systemic racism to occur in the organization that I have passionately been a part of. That is not only insulting, that is tone deaf and hurtful, since that is not what happened with Shaq's World. And Mayor Lehman, as the chair, should have ruled the complainant out of order immediately. And then this never would have happened. But because I did what he failed to do, we are unfortunately here where we could be doing better things. The fact that our mayor at the time didn't rule me out of order, or Councillor Natalie Harris, who agreed with my comments about lack of leadership, and Councillor Harvey's subsequent comments, who also made impassionate comments, that should give everybody a pause as to why the chair, that being the mayor, allowed all three of us to make our comments that night. The answer? We were well within our line with our comments, well within the code, and all of us are just tired and exhausted of the shaming behavior over the years when the complainant does not get a political outcome.
Council voted to decide on the report right after Morales spoke. It would have initially been slated to come up later on in the evening. However, first Craig responded. She said Morales' apology, which he had said he extended earlier on, was not sufficient. And here's why.
There are people much smarter than me who have set out what an apology should contain. And so keeping in mind that an apology is a recognition that someone has been harmed, you express regret for having said or done it. You also in some way take responsibility for the action. So an apology is not, I'm sorry that that happened, but it happened because you made me. And so I think that while I cannot discuss what was discussed in the informal resolution, to be very clear, if you have confidence in your integrity commissioner, I have no desire to take the time of council by bringing frivolous and vexatious matters before you.
Basically, she stood by her decision. Morales' remarks contravened the code of conduct for city councillors. In response to a certain councillor's questions, Councillor Alwyn spoke as well, and here's what he had to say about the situation and why he wouldn't pull back the commissioner request.
We need to work together better, and I'm committed to doing so. and I hope we can start focusing on the issues that really matter to our constituents. A lot of people are hurting right now, and they need us to focus on that important work. And I think we need some healing around the table. And I believe that you can't have healing without accountability. I believe in accountability, and I will be supporting the recommendations because of that.
The main thrust of Council's discussion was the issue of an apology. What does an apology mean, and what kind of apology is enough in this situation? Councillor Harvey brought up a discussion on why the situation seemed to be treated differently than when Councillor Alwyn was reported on for remarks he made about federal representatives and white supremacy. Suzanne Craig said that the situation was different, as Alwyn's behavior and remarks were made in good faith, she said, whereas Morales were not in the context of a city council discussion. A lot of the continuing discussion was based off Morales' engagement in the process of the complaint. Well, all city councilors did speak on this issue. Here's Mayor Lehman's wrap up before the vote finally occurred.
There are a number of good comments, and I really appreciate Jim's, Councillor Harris's last statement. What's at issue tonight is the how, not the why. And with great respect to Councillor Morales, who felt he was justified because of the why, it is the how that is at issue.
In conclusion, through a counted vote, Council passed the motion, accepting the Commissioner's report unanimously. To watch that whole 1.5-hour discussion, check out the City of Barrie's YouTube page. That was a large part of this recap and a large part of City Council, so I'll speed through the rest. Next up were deputations on paid sick days by Michael Spears on behalf of 15 and Fairness Barrie. He spoke on the need for paid sick days and what he and many others say is an integral way we can stop the spread of COVID-19 and also provide for the many frontline workers in our community. Next up was a representative of the proposed Lynx indoor gun range. He spoke on the proposed range, and basically he wanted to clarify a question of ownership of the proposed gun range. Many councillors were confused as to the name, which is similar to a restaurant down the street, and as well there were many inconsistencies with the plan as reported to Council in regards to ownership. Council voted to approve applications for reduction and cancellation of taxes. They also voted to approve the solicitor-client advice regarding the harassment case involving the Arden Burles law firm, and that refers back to a case last year involving a city councillor and a harassment case against a City Hall employee. All other general committee reports were approved unanimously as well. For more, check out our link in bio for the whole package of motions. Lastly, a direct motion passed, which saw funding for the fire department, and that would cover virtual fire inspections and basically transitioning education aspect of the fire hall. Lastly, a in-depth Stormwater Climate Action Fund presentation. Now, I won't go into detail on this. It's also linked in our bio. This is basically a review of work completed on the stormwater asset management process. It's renovating and refurbishing Barrie's stormwater plan with culverts, stormwater ponds, and more. How the city can engage residents as well to decrease or change the way that they engage with the stormwater process. That includes everything from how you wash your car to how you change over your pool to how you water your grass. And the report was comprehensive. At one point, there was suggested there would be credits for homeowners and residents out of their water bill for actions that help the stormwater plan. I'll skip through most of the announcements this week, but Mayor Lehman announced $50,000 in federal funding for that stormwater management plan, and that's thanks to the work from city staff. And as always, there's a lot of big things passed for the city in each city council meeting. Like 3 new task forces, which we'll see to tackling big issues in Barrie and engaging the public. So for the full minutes, head to the City of Barrie's website.